this is my attempt to recreate Andy Timmons' rig and a preset on the quad Cortex. If we go through it, I guess the first thing I would point out is we're running on both lines, and lines 3 and 4 are really the amps and some of the ambient stuff that he would run in his effects loop. And then line 1 is a lot of the gain stages he has on his pedal board. So why don't we walk through the back-end amp settings, and then we'll go scene by scene that I've created and talk about the gain stages. So like he does, we're running stereo Lone Star 100 watts on the clean channel. And this is a little different than he runs it. He tends, from what I saw on the rig rundown that he had, he runs all his pedals into one of the amps, comes out of the effects loop into things like his halo delay and things like that. And then the stereo outputs from those ambient effects goes back into not only the original amp, but into the effects loop return of a second amp. So he's really using kind of one preamp and 2 power amps to get the stereo effects. We can't really mimic that here in the quad Cortex, so I'm going to go ahead and run kind of full stereo amps. And what I did is, they're set pretty similarly, but they're not exactly the same. This one's set pretty clean, gains on 4. You know, with the Lone Star, you got to drop the bass, in my experience, pretty low, otherwise it gets real boomy. And then you've got mid and treble and presence about a little less than halfway. The other Lone Star here is, I've got a little more gain on it, and you can see the bass is a little lower actually, and then the mid and treble and the presence are up a little bit, as is the master. Both of them are running on the thicker mode. And one thing I noticed with the thicker mode is not only does it fill in the tone, but you get a little bit more of a little more presence, a little more attack on it. If you back that off, I've noticed too, the tones tends to get a little rounder. And then both amps are running into this Mesa 2x12 V30. These are, I think, pretty much the same cabinets that he uses. So it's a nice warm 2x12. I think it works pretty well. So let's talk about his delay setup. So he runs a dual delay, and then he's got his Halo signature delay pedal that kind of has both delays built in. I've tried mimicking that in a couple different ways. On a couple other presets, I ran the delays in stereo. In this one, I tried out running the 2 delays in series. So the first delay, we're running stereo tape delays, and this one's running the shorter of the 2, kind of around 370, 380 milliseconds. And I've got it set to ping pong. So this shorter delay is then running into the longer delay, which is up more towards 500 milliseconds. And what that gives is trying to mimic that kind of having the 2 delays interact with each other to kind of create that halo effect. And I do have a very slight reverb on the end. You can see the mix is very low. Again, this is just to give a sense of that you're in the room with the amp. It's not really adding a lot of ambience to it. It's mostly the delays. So when we play, you can hear the delays are kind of ping-ponging and playing off each other. And I thought this was kind of a pretty close approximation of what the halo sounds like. Obviously, there's a lot of specific ways that's set up, and it's hard to recreate. Like I said, you can go with more of a stereo delay setup if you want, and I've done that on other presets if you want to look at that. But in this preset, I went ahead and kind of did this series model. And so let's look at the different scenes that we've got here. So scenes E and A are kind of the clean sounds. I've got a kind of a straight clean sound, and then a chorus clean. F and B, you're getting a little more gain. I've got an RC boost on the front of the clean, and then he's got a BB preamp that he uses. A lot of his kind of lower gain sounds, he uses a lot of different pedals, and he kind of talks like 2% difference, and you will find that these things start to sound pretty similar after a while. We've got the blues driver here, and then I've got a a scene up here that's using the RC boost into the BB, so it's a little more gained up. And then I've got two leads here. I downloaded somebody did a capture of the Andy Timmons signature drive. I found one I liked and tried that. And then to try to use one that's using the kind of built-in models, I used the Governor overdrive pedal with a little bit of compression up front. I think that kind of approximated it quite a bit. So let's go through each one real quick. So for the clean tone, pretty much straight into the amps. The only thing we're doing, like he does, is we've got a compressor on the front end. So not a lot of compression. It is pushing the amp quite a bit. So if you were, for instance, to turn that off, the amp on its own would sound like this. And then the compressor just kind of kicks the front of the amp. So there's a little bit of grit if you dig in, mostly because the compressor's kind of kicking the front, but it's pretty clean. It's just got a nice little edge to it. And then this scene is just adding this chorus, and I'm using a dual chorus here, which seemed closest to what he uses, which is kind of not super subtle, but also not over the top on the chorusing. So if we go to this one, we still got the compressor on, and then I'm adding in the RC drive, which is the Exotic Z Boost. Again, gain's not very high, and we're kicking the front of the amp somewhat. So a nice, just adds a little bit more grit to the front of that. So the one thing I'll mention is a lot of these lower gain presets, I've got a compressor on the back end here, and I did a whole different video on this about a week ago. As I got into this, trying to create this preset for Andy Timmons, a lot of what he does is kind of having these gain stages pushing the front of his amp, and then he uses the volume knob on the guitar to kind of back off and clean it up. Well, I find that the amps in the Quad Cortex don't necessarily react well in that way. When you back off the volume, you lose a lot of volume rather than just losing the compression. So, one trick to do that is to fix that is to add a compressor behind the amp here. And what that's doing is kind of mimicking how the amp would sag. So as you back up the volume, it's compressing less, and so the amp cleans up, but the volume doesn't drop very much. And you'll see that compressor block is on for really all of the main gain stages. For the higher gain ones, I've got a lot lower mix because I don't want it doing a lot of that. But I still wanted it there because I wanted to be able to back off the volume even on the higher gain stuff and get it to clean up a little bit. So that's what that gain is doing. So this is just the BB preamp on its own. I can get it to clean up a little bit with the volume knob. And then this scene adds in the RC boost in front of that. And you heard this tone in the playing at the beginning of the video. And then this is one of his main tones, is using the blues driver. He's got a Keeley modded blues driver Obviously, that's not in the Quad Cortex. I think the main thing there is it has kind of a low gain mode. And so, again, kind of relatively low gain. Tone is pretty neutral, and then the volume is really kicking the front of the amp. So, in the beginning playing, it's like I could back off the volume control and get a pretty clean tone. A little bit more to get kind of a clean lead tone. If you dig into it, you get some grit. But volume all the way up, it's pretty, there's a lot of drive. And the other thing I would say is, I added a noise gate for this patch, because I found, if you can hear that hiss, the Blues Driver model on the Quad Cortex is pretty loud. There's a lot of hiss to it. So I found that I had to add the noise gate, and it's not coming from my guitar because I got a noise gate built into the input. You can see that here. But that Blues Driver just seems really loud, and I had to add in an extra noise gate there to kind of compensate. And then the lead tones, like I said, I downloaded this capture. Someone had captured the at drive, and I thought it sounds good. I don't know that it sounds exactly like the sounds I've heard from him, but then again, I also don't have his specific guitar. But I think overall, this is a pretty good capture. And one thing I'm doing for both lead tones, and I do this pretty often, is just put a little bit of a high cut on the end, just to smooth out some of the top end on those kind of lead tones. And then for this tone, this is my attempt at kind of recreating that kind of at sound with the existing models on the Quad Cortex. So here what I'm doing is I'm using a brick governor, which is kind of, the Marshall pedal, and you can see I've also got the compressor on the front to add a little bit more kind of compression and fullness. So, this works pretty well, but I thought both lead tones are pretty close. In the video, at the beginning of the video, I was using this one, the capture, but I wanted to see if I could get close to the tone with kind of the existing models on the Quad Cortex. So anyway, this preset is on my Neural account for you to kind of grab and download. Feel free to play around with it, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.